Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing the special episode, which is the first part of the Legend of Thunder, the technical first episode of Pokemon Chronicles, which is actually a little side series that chronicles side adventures from other characters in the Pokemon universe. That's mostly set either from during Johto or between Johto and Hoenn, but this first episode here, the Legend of Thunder Part 1, is set during Johto between episodes 232 and 233, so that's why I'm doing it now. So without further ado, here is the Legend of Thunder Part 1. The episode begins with a battle between two trainers, our main character for the special, Jimmy, and another trainer named Shinji. As Shinji, the opponent, sends out his Pokemon, Hitmonlee, he declares that it was extremely strong and even unbeatable, so he would obviously be able to beat Jimmy's ass. Especially because it was apparently his strongest Mon. Jimmy admits that Shinji may be right, Shinji may be able to beat him, because Jimmy had ended up losing half of his matches, but he decided to send out his Pokemon, Typhlosion anyways, who he called his team leader. The battle starts with Hitmonlee going for a jump kick, but Typhlosion blocks by grabbing Hitmonlee's leg mid-kick. However, Hitmonlee's other leg was still free, so it tried to hit Typhlosion with another kick, being a rolling kick, which does enough damage to Typhlosion for Hitmonlee to be able to free itself. Since the rolling kick was straight to Typhlosion's head, the Hitmonlee's trainer was very confident that Typhlosion would go down. However, Typhlosion was still standing, raring to go, shaking off the kick like no big deal, leading Hitmonlee to try again, this time with a high jump kick, as it jumps and begins to come down to Typhlosion, only for Typhlosion to use a flamethrower to intercept it. It's then that Jimmy explains that, although he had lost all of his matches, he had learned a lot from all those losses, and it was because of that he was going to win. And sure enough, the single flamethrower was able to do enough damage to Hitmonlee to knock it out, winning Jimmy the battle, as he high-fived his Typhlosion, calling it a high paw. While Jimmy was happy though, Shinji runs over to his Hitmonlee to check on him, and almost cries with sadness at the loss, but he corrects himself, knowing he had to be a good sport, and declares to Jimmy that he would learn from his defeat, just as Jimmy had seen to. Jimmy respects this, so as the audience who had been watching the battle cheers, Jimmy and Shinji shake hands, and Typhlosion and Hitmonlee give each other stares of acknowledgement before Hitmonlee tries to talk to Typhlosion and compliment it, as does Shinji to Jimmy and Jimmy to Shinji. Shinji and Jimmy then fully give each other some introductions, as they had just decided to battle without them. Shinji introduces himself as being from Kasado City on Silver Rock Island, which was that city that had all those fake Silverwing pins and shit, yeah, remember that? And then Jimmy introduces himself as being from Newbark Town, and a relatively standard trainer who raises, battles with, and grows strong along with his Pokemon. The two trainers then decide to battle again as they exchange Pokegear numbers. Pokegear was literally just a phone, a way of contact. Why Ash and the gang didn't have one, I don't know. It would certainly make it easier than having to go to a Pokemon Center and use the computer there all the time, but regardless, that doesn't really matter. The episode then pans to shots of many wild Pokemon, including water ones, such as Lapras, Magikarp, Gyarados, Chinchou, Lantern, Staryu, and Starmie, and we have some ground ones like Sandshrew, Sandslash, Dugtrio, Diglett. We have some normal ones like Dunsparce, both Nidorans, male and female, and then you have Hoppip, Skiploom, Chumpluff, Oddish, Mankey, Spinarak, Ariados, Rattata, Raticate, Pidgey, Sentret, Lediba, Stantler. You get the idea, a whole bunch. Anyways, after this, the next thing we see is a Team Rocket aircraft flying through a mountain range or a canyon of some sort. It eventually looks as though it was going to land on the ground at a random spot, but then this spot opens up to reveal a helipad underneath the ground, which is what the aircraft actually lands on. Then, the helipad lowers with the aircraft on it, going into one of Team Rocket's massive secret underground bases, and soon enough, two Team Rocket members come out of the aircraft, one of them being Attila, the one with the blonde hair and tank top looking gray Team Rocket uniform, and the one with the white hair being Han. And the two Team Rocket members then greet a scientist who is in the base, known as Professor Sebastian. Han then introduces Attila as his new partner, meaning that her and Sebastian likely have never met before. Dr. Sebastian then remarks how he had been eagerly waiting for Han and Attila to arrive, complaining about how it took them so long, as he explains that the reason why he requested Han to come here was because he wanted to show them his new weapon, which was the Crystal Field Generation System, or Crystal System for short, which was powered by a central crystal known as the Miracle Crystal. He clarifies that the purpose of the weapon was to be able to control electricity, explaining that the weapon was able to attract any electricity emitted and then store it inside, with the crystal being unaffected by the electricity itself, since the crystal would generate a protective field around it. Essentially, the protective field allowed the electric currents to still go inside of the crystal to power it up, but it let the crystal be undamaged by the actual electricity, and the field also allowed the crystal to deflect the electricity back at whoever administered it. The scientist then shows them a demonstration to prove this as he releases electricity, which gets absorbed into the crystal. He does this multiple more times, each time with a more powerful jolt of electricity, essentially making a lightning show as every single bit of electricity gets absorbed. And Dr. Sebastian claims that no matter how powerful the electricity was, the crystal would still absorb it. Han and Attila were amazed by this mechanism, as they commented that electric Pokemon would now be helpless. And Attila knew that because of this, it would be perfect for their plan, which involved getting unlimited power. Han and Attila were obviously also very intrigued at the prospect of getting unlimited power, and Professor Sebastian confirmed that this device would definitely help the three of them achieve that. Meanwhile, back with Jimmy, he was traveling on a random-ass route when he encountered a Pokémon Center and decided to go in it to heal up all his Pokémon, which Nurse Joy gladly obliged to. After this, Jimmy was about to leave, but Nurse Joy advises him that he should probably stay and rest a little while, as opposed to getting back on the road, since it was a long way to the next town, and Jimmy decided that Nurse Joy had the right idea, and proceeded to rest a little bit, as he groomed Typhlosion and complimented it on its skills, congratulating it for winning that battle today, against Shinji. Jimmy was then distracted as he looked in front of him to see a trainer dipping his feet in the Pokemon Center pool, hanging out with his Poliwag, Chinchou, and Starmie, and he was then distracted even further when he heard a familiar voice and laugh coming from a girl he knew named Marina talking to someone on the Pokemon Center computers behind him. When he looks at Marina, he immediately knows it's her, due to seeing her Mischievous floating beside her, and he walks up behind her as she was talking with a boy named Vincent on the computer, telling Vincent about how well her and her Mischievous, nicknamed Little Miss, did in a Pokemon show earlier that was primarily focused on battling. While Jimmy was looking at Marina, Vincent, as well as Marina's Mischievous, spotted Jimmy, and Vincent instantly called out as he recognized Jimmy. He then talks to Marina, telling her to turn around and look, because Jimmy was here, and Marina was initially confused by this, as she seemed to forget who Jimmy was, but eventually she remembered, and excitedly greeted Jimmy, getting off the computer, although not hanging up on Vincent just yet. Upon seeing Marina's excitement, Jimmy blushes, indicating that he may have liked her a little bit. Or perhaps he was just blushing because he was embarrassed by her, because she was screaming excitedly his name at this point, like, "Jimmy, Jimmy, it's you!" And Jimmy just tried to nonchalantly greet her by going, "Yo." Marina still talks excitedly, though, as she then greets Jimmy's Typhlosion and questions if it was the evolved Cyndaquil that he had got from Professor Elm at the start of his journey, to which Jimmy confirms, adding that Typhlosion was very powerful. This implies that Marina and Jimmy may have started out their journeys together, and both got a starter from the same time at Professor Elm's lab. Anyways, Marina realizes that she was still technically on a call with Vincent, so she goes to end it, but Vincent pleads her not to, explaining that he wanted a chance to talk to Jimmy as well. So with that, Marina calls Jimmy over to the video phone, and Jimmy and Vincent talk, while Marina tended to her Mischievous. Although Jimmy seemed like he wasn't really interested in talking to Vincent, Vincent talked anyway, as he told Jimmy to lean closer, as he had something kind of private to tell him. Jimmy obliged, and Vincent then warned Jimmy harshly to not try anything with Marina, since he wanted Marina to be his girlfriend, quietly whispering to Jimmy for him not to take Marina away. He expects Jimmy to rebuttal, especially when Jimmy starts blushing, indicating that he did in fact like Marina as well. But, much to Vincent's surprise and disbelief, Jimmy simply replies, "What are you talking about, bro? I would not steal your girl. I don't like Marina." Vincent obviously knew that Jimmy was lying, as not only had Jimmy told him that he liked Marina before, but he also saw Jimmy blushing immensely now. When Jimmy claims he was lying, though, and begins to shout a little loudly, Jimmy fears that Marina would hear, and he obviously didn't want her to find out about his crush on her, so he hangs up on Vincent as he denies Vincent's claims yet again. With Vincent now dealt with, Jimmy resumes talking with who he actually wanted to talk with, Marina, as they decide to take a little food and drink break as well, as Mischievous and Typhlosion eat some Pokemon food, and Jimmy drinks a soda. While he drinks, he tells Marina about his journey so far, as Marina informs him on hers. The subject of the conversation then eventually changes to Marina trying to flirt with Jimmy by asking for his Pokegear number, indicating that she may have liked him. But Jimmy thought this was a trap, suspecting that Marina thought that Jimmy liked her, and she wanted to try and make him admit it, but Jimmy of course didn't want to admit this, so he denied her request for his number, claiming that he wasn't big on phone calls. Marina continues flirting though, trying to get Jimmy to admit his feelings, as she claims that Jimmy must have missed her, after being separated for so long. When Marina sees that Jimmy was continuing to ignore her flirtatious attempts, she teases Jimmy, stating that he was only trying to ignore her because he was afraid of her, since he liked her. Jimmy, as Marina expected, gets frazzled by this, and denies Marina's claims, pleading for her to change the subject, which only made Marina's claims more obviously true. Even Typhlosion knew that Jimmy liked Marina now. Anyways, Marina obliges and does change the subject, questioning if Jimmy thought that he had changed much during his journey so far, with Jimmy stating that he wasn't sure, and asking Marina the same question. Marina uses this as an opportunity to try and get Jimmy to admit his feelings again, as she directs the question back at him, asking if he thought that anything about her had changed, hoping that Jimmy would compliment her beauty. However, Jimmy just claims he didn't see anything different about Marina either. Marina accuses Jimmy of playing coy, stating that someone had told her that she looked like a supermodel, and claimed that Jimmy probably thought this as well, but he was just too afraid to admit it, in fear that Marina would find out that he liked her. Jimmy denied that he liked her, yet again, leading Marina to write up a poem on the spot and begin reciting it, trying to wow Jimmy and make him admit his feelings yet again, but Jimmy still denied, getting pretty visibly frazzled and annoyed at this point. And when Marina saw this, she realized that she didn't really want to scare Jimmy away, so she decided to actually change the subject, like Jimmy had initially requested, talking about how she wanted to be an actress and performer who battled with her Pokemon to make people happy. Essentially, she believed that just having a battle wasn't nearly as fun as trying to make a performance out of the battle, and she wanted to make sure that people were constantly happy and having fun, and she figured that performing a whole bunch of these shows with battles in them would be a great way to do this, stating that seeing people happy made her happy as well. Jimmy then talks about his goal to be a great Pokemon trainer, and reminds Marina of all of the kids in Newbark Town, and states that the reason why he wanted to be such a great trainer was so that he could share all his trainer knowledge with all the trainers in Newbark Town and help them raise their own Pokemon. Essentially, he wanted to make not just himself strong, but the entire town of Newbark strong as well. Upon hearing that Jimmy wanted to be a great trainer, Marina got very, very excited, as she mentioned that if Jimmy trained hard enough, he may even be able to become stronger than her idol, the strongest Pokemon trainer in all of Johto, the Johto League champion, also the former strongest Elite Four of Kanto, Lance. Yes, that's right. Lance was technically the strongest Pokemon trainer that we had been introduced to at this point, as he was one of the strongest trainers in all of Kanto for sure, as he was the strongest Elite Four, and then he was able to progress to the Johto champion. Obviously, essentially any trainer knew about Lance and his strength, including Jimmy, so Jimmy claimed that he could never be as strong as someone like Lance. And much to Jimmy's surprise, Marina actually thinks that Jimmy was correct in his assumption, as she changes her mind, believing Lance to be too strong as well. And she then proceeds to gush over Lance, calling him Fabulance, and explaining he was known as the Dragon Master with his Dragonite and Gyarados, and essentially revealing that Lance was her fucking idol. She even had a fucking scrapbook full of pictures of him and shit. And stamps as well, which I think just showed how famous he was, because not a lot of Pokemon trainers had stamps. Marina declared that her dream was to meet Lance, stating that once she became big enough of a performer, then she would be able to star alongside him and be just as famous as him, and essentially team up to become a duo. Since Marina casted doubt on Jimmy's ability to be a good trainer, Jimmy put his doubt on Marina being able to become a good performer, and stated his belief that Marina and Lance could never team up, because Lance was too focused on Pokemon battling, and Marina was too focused on Pokemon performing, so they wouldn't work well in synergy. But Marina rebutted that performing and battling went together perfectly, explaining that she did a mix of both, and decided to battle Jimmy to prove this, stating that she would have her Pokemon dance around and perform while she battled, and also kick Jimmy's ass. Also stating that she wanted to battle to show off her Pokemon to Jimmy, as he hadn't seen them in quite a while, and Jimmy agreed to battle, wanting to show off his Typhlosion as well. Because of only wanting to use his Typhlosion, Jimmy states that the battle should be a one-on-one battle, but Marina said she wanted to show off two of her Pokemon, so requested a two-on-two battle, and Jimmy decided to oblige, as Marina sent out her Jigglypuff, nicknamed Little Pink. And she does a little motto and dances with Jigglypuff when she sends it out, introducing herself and Jigglypuff, trying to impress Jimmy with her dancing. However, Jimmy was not impressed, as he claimed that Marina had to stop dancing and just get on with the battle, stating that she had to take battling more seriously. And he then sent out his Beedrill, not wanting to start off with Typhlosion. And Marina then recognizes this Beedrill as a Weedle that Jimmy caught at the beginning of his journey when him and Marina were still together, and realized that Jimmy must have evolved it. Also, when I say together, I don't mean that Jimmy and Marina were ever in a relationship. I just meant like when they still hung out together. But anyways, after Marina admires the Beedrill for a little bit, Jimmy gets confident that he could win, and taunts Marina by stating that she could make the first move. Marina doesn't get offended by this at all, and happily goes for the first move, as she orders Jigglypuff to sing. This leads Jimmy to order an agility, which works in Jimmy's favor, since when Beedrill was going so fast flapping its wings, the loud sound of its wings was able to drown out the sound of the singing, so Beedrill wasn't put asleep, as the sound waves didn't reach its ears. With Jigglypuff's attack nullified, Jimmy went in for an actual attack of his own, being Twin Needle, but Jigglypuff, or Little Pink if you will, was able to dodge by puffing up and inflating itself, and then using its inflated body to float up like a balloon. Jimmy tries several more Twin Needles, but all of them miss, as Jigglypuff was able to stealthily dodge all of them, floating around. Jimmy questions how Jigglypuff was so good at dodging, leading Marina to explain that Jigglypuff was able to dodge due to doing so many hours of dance rehearsals, and essentially all of this dancing made it extremely agile, allowing it to dodge really well, which in turn proved Marina's point that dancing helped with battling, as did performing in general. However, Marina was so distracted by gassing up her Jigglypuff, and even ordered it to do a little bit of random-ass dance moves, distracting the Jigglypuff as well, that all of this allowed Jimmy to order his Beedrill to use Pin Missile, and this hit Jigglypuff multiple times, since Jigglypuff was too distracted to dodge. And due to being hit by so many pin missiles, it couldn't hold its breath anymore to inflate itself, so this just meant that it couldn't dodge, even if it did become undistracted again, and eventually the pin missile was able to knock Jigglypuff out, giving Jimmy the first win. As Jigglypuff's body deflates, Marina recalls it as it flies over to her, and Jimmy asks if she was going to give up, but Marina denies this, stating that she of course had another Pokemon. Jimmy pleads for Marina not to have this one dance, as it was annoying to have to dodge her Pokemon's dancing, but Marina just thought that Jimmy was joking, thinking that he wanted a challenge, and proceeded to send out her second Pokemon, a Croconaw, who she nicknamed Wani Wani, and confirmed that this Croconaw was the same Totodile that she had gotten from Professor Elm, because she had gotten a starter from him as well. This led Jimmy to, much to Marina's surprise, send out his Typhlosion, recalling his Beedrill. Marina reminded him that Typhlosion was a fire type, and therefore had a massive disadvantage against the Croconaw, so therefore declared that she would easily win the battle. However, Jimmy responded that he knew that Typhlosion had a type advantage, but he wanted to challenge him and Typhlosion to see if they were strong enough to beat a Pokemon even at a disadvantage. This leads Marina to accuse Jimmy of being too egotistical, but she decides to let Jimmy do whatever the fuck he wanted, as she orders her Croconaw to use Water Gun. Marina was initially going to have her Croconaw do some dancing around first, but she had noticed that some dark-looking storm clouds had gathered in the sky, and she feared that a storm would ruin the battle, so she wanted to finish it off quickly. and she fully expected Water Gun to be able to do the job against a fire type, but much to Marina's surprise, Jimmy had Typhlosion willingly tackle into the Water Gun, and Typhlosion was so powerful that it didn't take any damage to this attack that should have decimated it. Because of this, Jimmy is able to continue charging with his Typhlosion and order his Typhlosion to use Quick Attack, but before the Quick Attack could make contact, Croconaw tried to dodge by dancing away, and because it dodged, the Quick Attack missed. And there was another reason why it was good that the Croconaw was able to dodge as well, as the spot where it was originally standing was then struck by lightning, because a storm had fully arrived. It was now more so than just the clouds. Jimmy and Marina checked to make sure that their Pokemon weren't harmed by the lightning, and then look up into the sky to see more thunderbolts coming down from the sky than they had ever seen in their entire life. So they realized that this was no ordinary storm, and begin to panic, as Jimmy suggests that they go and hunker down back at the Pokemon Center and call off the battle. Marina agrees, and begins running to the Pokemon Center with Jimmy, as they expected their Croconaw and Typhlosion to follow. However, they noticed that their Croconaw and Typhlosion were attracted by the storm, and they wanted to find out what was going on. So they instead run towards the storm, leading Jimmy and Marina to call their Pokemon back. With the exception of Marina's Mischievous Little Miss, who she had led out to watch the battle, as Mischievous had flew away too far towards the forest where the storm seemed to come from, and it couldn't be recalled. Marina informs Jimmy of this, and the two of them hurriedly rush in the direction of the storm to retrieve Mischievous so that it didn't get harmed in the storm. Meanwhile, the source of the storm and the strange purple clouds were revealed to be Team Rocket using the Miracle Crystal. Professor Sebastian had permitted Hun and Attilia to use the crystal for their plan. So Attilia and Hun had went over to an area using a mech and set up the crystal in front of it. Attilia and Hun's plan was essentially to use the crystal to attract electric Pokemon and then capture the electric Pokemon. So Attilia and Hun were inside the mech looking at several computer screens which were able to detect Pokemon around the area, and just as Attilia and Hun were hoping, the crystal had attracted dozens of electric Pokemon as the radar showed a whole bunch of Pokemon approaching the crystal. However, Hun was not satisfied as much as Attilia was, despite all of the electric Pokemon gathering around, as he asked if the one that they were really looking for was detected on the radar, reminding Attilia that this one Pokemon was all that they needed for their plan. They didn't even need all the other electric ones. Unfortunately, Attilia confirmed that the Pokemon they were looking for wasn't on the radar when she saw several electric Pokemon, such as a Voltorb, Electrode, Mareep, Flaffy, Magnemite, and Magneton show up, but not the Mon they were looking for. Because of this, Attilia began to doubt that the Pokemon they were looking for even existed in the first place, reminding Hun that it only existed in myths and legends. There was no confirmation of its existence, so if it didn't get attracted to the electricity, then maybe it didn't even exist in the first place. However, Hun stated that he was sure that it would eventually show up, especially since the legends that it was involved in stated that it would come to help electric Pokemon that were in danger. This Pokemon that they were talking about, as I'm sure you could guess by now, was Raikou, one of the legendary beasts. See why it's placed here, because we just had that episode about the legendary beasts? Anyways, Attilia still had doubts that the Raikou would even show up, so she decided to try and capture several of the other electric Pokemon in the mech, so that her and Hun would at least have something to give back to Team Rocket, and she managed to successfully knock down a Mareep, but then a Raichu tried to protect it by using an electric attack, but of course, the electric attack was just absorbed by the crystal. So, instead of the electric attack hitting Attilia and the mech, as the Raichu had planned, the electric attack gets reflected by the crystal, and therefore hits Raichu and a lot of other electric Pokemon, injuring them and knocking them down. Since the deflection had a big enough range to hit a whole bunch of electric Pokemon, as opposed to just the Raichu that sent the attack. With a lot of the electric Pokemon downed, Attilia proceeds to grab the Raichu and a lot of the electric Pokemon with the mech, capturing them, right as Mischievous shows up in the area, closely followed by Marina and Jimmy. Marina instantly scolds her Mischievous for running away, but she stops herself as she then notices the mech grabbing a whole bunch of electric Pokemon with its giant claws. Jimmy and Marina are disgusted by these crimes that Team Rocket were committing, and decide to confront them and fight them as Marina grabs her Mischievous to make sure it didn't run away again. However, before Jimmy, Marina, and Mischievous can jump in, they then see a huge yellow thundercloud vortex thing that seemed to be filled with lightning coming down from the sky. As this lightning began to strike nearby hills, not getting absorbed by the crystal, Hun got excited as he realized that this lightning must have been coming from Raikou, meaning that Raikou was about to arrive. He tried to tell Attilia to capture some more Pokemon as fast as she could to potentially try and anger the Raikou more so that Raikou would reveal itself faster. However, this wasn't necessary, as suddenly more lightning struck and a roar could be heard, which indicated that Raikou was just about to reveal itself, and sure enough, a new symbol appeared on the computer screen inside the mech, much brighter and larger, just as Attilia had predicted. Attilia informed Hun of this, stating that she didn't have to do anything to get Raikou to appear, as she exclaimed, "It's Raikou! It's here! This has to be it!" Hun didn't believe her at first, but then a bolt of lightning, louder and brighter than any of the ones before, struck the hill, and Raikou emerged from inside the lightning, as the lightning disappeared, with the Raikou having essentially floated down from the thundercloud. Attilia and Hun were amazed by the Raikou, and motioned for it to come over, as Marina questioned what the fuck Raikou was, as her or Jimmy had never seen it before, so Marina requests Jimmy to use his Pokedex on it, and he does, which states that Raikou was the legendary Thunder Pokemon, although specified that other details were unknown. So all they knew about Raikou was that it was a legendary, and this obviously left Jimmy immensely shocked at the fact that he was seeing a legendary Pokemon, knowing how rare they were. commenting on how he thought legendary Pokemon never revealed themselves. Just then, Raikou leaped into action, obviously because the reason why it had showed up was so that it could save all of the electric Pokemon. So it jumped down from the hill where the lightning struck, and immediately growled at all the freed electric Pokemon to scare them away, as it didn't want them to get captured. And its growls were definitely intimidating enough to scare away all the freed electric Pokemon, and then Raikou went for the captured ones by attacking Team Rocket's mech, and biting off the arms that were holding the Pokemon, and this freed them as a result, allowing Raikou to then focus all of its attention on the rest of Team Rocket's mech in order to defeat them. Jimmy and Marina noticed that Hun and Attilia weren't intimidated by Raikou doing this whatsoever. In fact, they were impressed by the Raikou's power, and it only made them want to capture the Raikou more, as they called the Raikou's attack graceful, even though it was far from graceful due to destroying the arms. But anyways, Hun and Attilia then tried to capture the Raikou, as they send out several more robotic arms from the mech. However, Raikou is able to swiftly dodge by jumping into the air, and then it aims a very strong Thunderbolt attack at the mech. However, this attack, even being as strong as Raikou's, gets absorbed into the crystal, just as Raichu's attack had been. Seeing that the crystal absorbed its attack, Raikou gets the idea to try and destroy the crystal, and sends another electric attack at it. However, Han and Attilia just laugh, as this is exactly what they wanted, as once this electric attack hit the crystal, it meant that the crystal had now absorbed enough electricity to generate the field around it, so now it could start deflecting the electric attacks back at Raikou. Sure enough, as Raikou keeps attacking the crystal, the field gets generated, as the field surrounds both the crystal and traps Raikou inside. So, as Raikou continues to attack with more electric attacks, Raikou ends up getting hit by its own attacks. Raikou tries to attack both the crystal and the field at different times to see if that would help, but it doesn't. As every time the field got hit, it repelled the electricity, and every time the crystal got hit, it absorbed it, which in turn gave the field more electricity to repel. So, at the end of the day, Raikou got so damaged by all the electric attacks that it collapsed to the ground, as Hun remarked that the more Raikou fought, the stronger Team Rocket got, and as a result, Raikou had become exhausted, so now Hun and Attilia were going to capture it. However, unbeknownst to Hun and Attilia, Jimmy and Marina's mischievous, had been watching the entire time, and were immensely angered by the Raikou falling down. Angry at Team Rocket, obviously, and Jimmy was so angry that right as Attilia launched the claw to capture Raikou, he stepped in and yelled, "Stop! Let Raikou go!" Attilia and Hun just laughed, claiming that Raikou was theirs now, and ordered Jimmy to get the fuck out of the way and stop interfering. But this just angered Jimmy more, as he decided to help out the Raikou by running forward to it and sending out his Typhlosion. However, before Typhlosion could do anything, Hun and Attilia jumped in by sending out their Steelix and Skarmory, respectively. Hun gives Jimmy one more chance to leave, as he warns him that if he didn't leave, then he would have his Steelix absolutely destroy him and his Typhlosion, and Marina then called out to Jimmy, advising him to stop being so reckless and leave as well, but Jimmy ignored both Hun and Marina, and directed his attention to the Raikou, telling it that he would save it no matter what, telling it to hang in there. Jimmy then directed his attention back to Attilia and Hun, as he threw Hun's threat back at him, stating that if Hun and Attilia didn't let Raikou go, then him and his Typhlosion would destroy them. Hun and Attilia just laughed, not believing that Jimmy was strong enough, as a battle then began between Typhlosion and Steelix and Skarmory. To be continued in Part 2.